Many of you watching today want to transition to the next level, to become A students. Is there a secret formula? Well, we talked about this in our previous video. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. But ultimately, the important thing is developing the right habits. Now, I truly understood the importance of habits in my third year of study. You see, like many of you, I was extremely successful in my matric year. Now, in my matric year, I had numerous distinctions. I was performing optimally, and I developed certain habits over time that were successful. So, naturally, it made sense to continue applying those methods. Unfortunately, I was at a crossroads in my third year. These habits that I had developed over time simply started to fail and were not working anymore. I needed to change it. So, therefore, I needed to come up with a new set of skills and strategies that were going to help me remain being an A student. What was I going to do? Hi, my name is Ukhandim Shunane, Chartered Accountant and Learning Strategist. Now, in today's video, I'll be talking about 5 terrible habits that you should avoid and stop today if you want to become an A student. Now, as I reflect on this video, it's a true reflection of some of these habits that I also had. So, hopefully, you watch till the end as we uncover the importance of behavioral changes in your quest to becoming a more efficient student. Now, let's go straight into it. The first habit that I had to stop was sleep. Now, naturally, most of you might be asking me, but Kanti, surely if you sacrifice sleep and work hard, you will be successful. It's a natural equation, right? The more hours you put in, the more effort you put in, therefore, it should equate to higher productivity and higher results. But unfortunately, to burst your bubble there, it simply doesn't work that way. How do I know this? I saw it firsthand. You see, at the height of being a poor student, I used to sleep on average 3 to 4 hours. On any good day, maybe I might sleep 5 or 6 hours, but on average, it was just 4 hours. But what I found was I was always sluggish and I often didn't have the energy to compete effectively in my studies, to the point whereby I also started forgetting information quite easily. Has this ever happened to you? You go to a test, before you write that test, you cram the whole night, only a week later to forget all that information. This simply wasn't sustainable because that information was required in subsequent exams, especially in the final exams. So I needed a way to be able to be more energetic, but equally to retain information for the long run. So hence I discovered the importance of sleep. When I started getting advice on how to become a better student and transition into becoming an A student, I then realized that all the top performing students were all getting adequate sleep. How much is adequate? About 7 to 8 hours of sleep on average. So I noticed that when I used to go to Wharton Wilder Library or any library for that matter, they were never there cross nighting. All the top students were sleeping. So then it hit me. I needed to sleep more. The minute I realized that and I started doing that, I noticed a change. Firstly, I was more energetic. It meant that I could focus more. I was therefore more productive with my hours. And in effect, I started remembering information for longer periods of time. Now, to clearly crystallize this concept, let me give you a real life example in my own academic journey. You see, in first year, I actually got a distinction for Economics 1A. And I equally got a distinction for Financial Accounting 3 in my third year. Now, if you were to ask me to write an exam about Economics 1 tomorrow, let me tell you, I would fail dismally. I can't tell you what I learned or what the principles were there at all. But what I do realize is that I crammed and did well at that time, but I wasn't punished for it. So if you ask me the same question now on Financial Accounting 3, where I started discovering the importance of sleep, I can write that test any day of the week. Doesn't matter whether it's a third year or a CGA exam, I will pass it because those principles are embedded. I retain them in the long run because I started to sleep. So, what does this mean for you? Invest in sleep if you want to become successful as a student. Make sure that you stop the bad habit of not having sufficient sleep in your study routine. Now, the second thing that I had to stop was this notion of rereading the textbook too much. Now, the majority of students, and I have to admit, I also include myself because I was also in this mess. The majority of us spend 90% of our study time rereading a textbook. Now, multiple research scholars have conducted multiple studies, and they found that the majority of students rely on rereading as their sole source of studying technique. Now, to illustrate how inefficient this is, I again reflect on my period when I was still a poor student. You see, I remember spending hours and hours on end reading textbooks and not really understanding. Does this happen to you as well? Where you read a textbook and it's so technical and abstract, and you keep on reading the whole day, one subject only. And what's happening in the meanwhile? Time is ticking because now the volume of work is increasing each week. The lecturers are not stopping for you, and ultimately you're in this constant cycle where you're always behind. I knew that this wasn't sustainable. And in fact, even if I did manage to study all those long hours, there was still no guarantee that I actually understood what I was doing. Now, for you to understand why this is such a terrible habit to reread the textbook too much, you need to understand how learning actually takes place. Now, learning takes place in two distinct forms. The first element or step in the learning process is collecting information. We typically collect information by reading textbooks or attending lectures or various sources of information. The second step of the learning process means actively recording that information so that you can practice questions and tutorials. Now, for you to be effective, you need to both A, collect information efficiently, and secondly, be able to recall that information, i.e., test yourself by doing practice question and exams before you actually write those tests and exams. Now, the problem with rereading the textbook too much is you often spend too much of your time only collecting information, and never enough time is being allocated to actually retrieve and recall that information. So then it hit me, I needed to have an equal balance if I wanted to be more effective. To the point whereby, even when I started conducting further research, I realized that actually the top student spent the majority of their time on actually recalling and doing the questions because that's where the majority of the learning takes place. And if you really want more insight on this, check out our other video where we revealed specifically the difference between active methods and passive methods. Doing questions actually account for over 70 to 80% of the knowledge that you retain in the long run. So very important. Now, you might be asking me, but Kanti, I get it, right? The majority of the information will come from doing questions, but I still need to read the textbook so that I can be able to attempt the questions. So where do I get the time to read the textbook and also attempt all the tutorials? Well, this is where my important strategy on attending classes became very handy. You see, what I started realizing that at the center of learning is context. So let me break it down for you. Assume that you're reading an article, and this article is simply about soccer. Now, when the author starts introducing jargons like penalties and free kicks within that article, you might get thrown off, right? Because if you don't have a foundation of soccer, all of these words will just not resonate with you, and the likelihood of you forgetting that information is extremely high. Let's now juxtapose that to someone who actually has a basic understanding of football. The minute you start introducing this jargon, you are more likely to relate to that information. In fact, you will recall it better because you can relate to it. So, what does this mean? The same concept can be applied to your academics. Now, with the right context, you will be able to retain information more easily. So, how do I get this context? Going to classes. What I realize is that when I go to classes or watch lecture videos, the lecturers are actually guiding me to make me understand why this principle is important. So, in effect, what real life problem is it solving? And they're also helping me to understand where to apply it, i.e., What's the set of circumstances for me to know to apply it? Now, the understanding of the why, the where, which is the trigger, as well as the how of application of that principle is critical, because once I started going to classes and getting the benefit of attending attentively in those classes, then when I went to the textbook, I actually read with a purpose. Because if you have the context, automatically you now start realizing what information is important and what information is additional. The ability to be able to filter this will save you time naturally, because now you don't have to spend all those hours trying to figure out what are they actually trying to achieve. You already know this, and therefore you can cut your study time drastically and also open up more time to be able to do your active learning methods, which is basically ensuring that you do the tutorials and examine yourself. So that's important. The third terrible study habit that you need to avoid is this notion of over highlighting. Now, I know what you're all thinking. What does it mean by actually over highlighting? Now, over highlighting is this broad concept that students will tend to want to be artists, right? We all like visually stimulating images. For example, you might highlight your entire book in different colors and you generally feel good about yourself. Others might write these beautifully handcrafted notes. But let's face it, the fact that you've got a colorful book with all these different highlights or you have beautiful notes doesn't guarantee that you actually understood the information. In fact, in most occasions, all those students tend to not even understand what they're doing. So then, does this mean I should stop highlighting? Absolutely not. It means you need to start highlighting or taking notes with a purpose. Now, how do I exactly do this? Right? At the core of understanding information is appreciating, number one, why it's important, and secondly, understanding the trigger. So that's why when I used to highlight, I highlighted with a purpose. So some practical skills or tips that can help you highlight more effectively. When you read a textbook, before you start highlighting, firstly skim over the work. Look at it briefly. Understand what is the overview of the concept that is being illustrated here. The minute you understand the gist of the article or the gist of the section and what they're trying to achieve there, you're going to be in a better position to understand what is important and what isn't. So therefore, naturally, you'll start highlighting more efficiently. The second thing is understanding what are the key things that tend to be highlighted. In my opinion, the key things that you should be looking to highlight are keywords, because keywords might be important to understand those principles or definitions. Equally, if there are any subheadings or titles, those are important because it helps you organize your principles correctly. And thirdly, any information within your textbook that helps you understand why this information is important, i.e., what problem is solving. And equally, any information that helps you understand the trigger, i.e., what is the clue, what are the set of circumstances for me to know to apply this principle, is also worth highlighting. The minute I started having this structured approach, I then started benefiting from highlighting. I also found this practically in my studies. For example, I enrolled for a course known as taxation that many of you might know. And equally, because I was applying these principles correctly, I was highlighting the why, the specific general provisos in one color, and any exceptions to the rule were in a different color, for example, red. The information automatically stood out to me and I was able to retrieve it more efficiently. The same thing can happen to you if you highlight more effectively. The fourth terrible habit that I would advise you to stop doing today if you want to become an A student is that you need to beat this monster called procrastination. Now, I know what you're thinking. Most of us struggle with procrastination. Procrastination is basically the ability to be able to do your tasks when you set yourself to do them. Now, most of the time, procrastination is caused by two broad concepts. The first of which is number one, ineffective planning, and number two, the inherent perception that actually studying is not fun. So let's deal with this, because naturally, if you want to become more productive and beat procrastination, it makes sense that you should have a plan in place And secondly, have a way to make your studying more fun so that you don't get discouraged from having to put it to another day because you're so disappointed or discouraged by the fact that you need to start studying. So, how do you do this? One practical tool that you can use is number one, have a timetable. Now, we do talk about in multiple of our videos about this concept of time management. In effect, if you put a timetable in place that clearly outlines when you are going to do the tasks, you are more likely to do them compared to someone who doesn't have a plan at all. So make sure that it's in your timetable, it's in your schedule, so that you're naturally motivated to do it. The second thing that you can do is make studying more fun. But how do you do this? What I realized is that at the core of people having this perception that studying is not fun is because of they don't know what they're going to be studying in the first place. Typically, if you have anxiety about the unknown, you're unlikely going to be excited about that activity. So, the natural remedy for you to be able to beat anxiety of what you don't know is to actually develop an expectation of what you're actually going to study. So, what I found worked for me was I used to consult lecturers and tutors, go to classes, and watch the videos beforehand. When I did that, I had an expectation of where I was going with this specific topic. I understood exactly what I was going to learn and what skills I was going to equip with. Because I understood what I was going to learn and the skills I was going to get, I was naturally curious. When you build up curiosity within yourself, you are more motivated to go and study as opposed to having this anxiety of the unknown. The second thing that helped me is that I then broke up my study sessions into smaller, manageable chunks. Let's face it, no one gets excited about studying because there's this perception that you have to spend hours and hours and hours studying. But what if hours turn to a few minutes? That sounds more reasonable to me. So that's what helped. I started breaking down my study sessions into smaller, manageable chunks. For example, I used to have 2 hour study sessions for each subject. And within each subject, I then broke it down into smaller 25-minute intervals. When I did that, I was naturally more motivated and encouraged to study because it was less daunting. 25 minutes studying and then taking a 5 minute break, and then 25 minutes again, taking another 5 minute break. Continually doing this within a 2 hour block was way more manageable. And that's why I was able to be motivated to go out and study when I was supposed to do it. Now, the last terrible habit that I would advise you to stop, and certainly not the least, is multitasking. Now, for some reason, we grow up believing that our brains are these super computers and machines that are able to move from one task to the next simultaneously while still remaining productive. We also have this absurd notion that actually, if you work on multiple tasks during a specific period, you will naturally achieve more. Let me tell you, the science simply does not back this up. I'm bursting your bubble today, and this is the reality. Now, multiple professors and multiple academics have done the research that clearly show that the misconception of multitasking is not warranted. For example, the professor at Stanford University conducted a research that actually found that multitasking can actually diminish your focus, reduce your effort, and actually reduce your cognitive abilities. Now, by far, one of the most scary research findings that were ever discovered on the art of multitasking has to come from the University of London. Now, the University of London identified that your IQ level actually reduces the more you multitask. In fact, the reduction of your IQ is so significant that it even surpasses your reduction if you were to smoke marijuana or even lose nights of sleep. Can you believe that? It's terrible. So, therefore, it means try to avoid multitasking as much as possible. Well, you might be asking again, but how do I do this? So the first thing you can do is follow the step we covered previously now, which talked about breaking down your study sessions. The more manageable and shorter your study sessions, the less urge you will have to have your cell phone next to you because you know that study sessions are shorter. The second thing is create reward systems for yourself. When you create a reward system to say, let me put my phone away, let me not get distracted for 2 hours, you then reward yourself after working hard with touching your phone after the 2 hour period. That's more efficient and will result in you focusing for longer periods of time as opposed to using your phone is making sure that each study session is dedicated to a specific subject. So what helped me was that in as much as I had short 2 hour study sessions, each study session was specifically dedicated to a subject. Once that 2 hour study session was complete, I then changed and looked at the next study session as being dedicated to another subject. I realized that the more I was doing this, changing the subject for each study session, the more refreshed I became. Because let's face it, our brains naturally have a short attention span. So you really want to be productive every time you study. So how you're able to do this is making sure that you're fresh and studying something new in each session. This naturally helped avoid multitasking as well because I didn't feel the urge or need to have the phone to support me and to make it more bearable to study because I was naturally curious, I was naturally excited, and I was refreshed in each single study session. Hopefully, this was helpful to you, and you now know the 5 terrible habits that you should avoid if you want to become an A student. Let's chat in the comment section. Would be great to understand from your perspective. Are there any terrible habits that we employ as students that we should avoid? Let's see in the comment section. Was there a specific study habit that you didn't agree with that's terrible? Or perhaps there's something more that we're missing. Whatever it is, make sure you comment in the comment section. Like the video and share it as well so that we can reach as many people and help them to be able to get this message. Now, until we meet again, remember, I believe in you. You can make it. Thanks.